Hello, thank you again. This is Akwesi Opong on Sunlight Radio Online. We are so glad to join you again on a Thursday evening. It's 8 p.m. and here in the northeast of the United States, we are so glad because we gained an extra hour of daylight this past week, and with the warm weather coming, we're all looking forward to getting out a little bit to our front lawn or outside our house to breathe a little bit of fresh air. So I hope that you are able to do something outside today, still being cautious of health regulations due to COVID. So I am very glad that in all of this you are interested in growing and building your relationship and your marriage, and you've made some time to join us today. So today we are going to talk about something very interesting that it's one of those topics that very few people address until they get to the point where it starts impacting their relationships, and that topic is boundaries. We are going to talk today about setting healthy boundaries for your marriage or your relationship. So we will get into the depths of this topic, and I will be very glad if anyone has any contributions, questions. The number again is 240-772-1420. We also have an email address. It's enjoylifewithyouspouse@gmail.com. We are so glad that it's time for us to learn today and to get equipped. As I always say, it's an opportunity to get the tools you need to equip your marriage and your relationship. So, today we are looking at setting healthy boundaries for your marriage. So you may ask, what are boundaries? When I hear the word boundaries, what I think about is when you're on the highway and you're driving and you see those guardrails on the highway. If you watch closely, those guardrails are located at spots where if you went over the highway, there's a drop, there's a valley or a ditch on the side of the guardrail or of the highway, and these guardrails have been put in place so that if in the event you get off the road, those guardrails will keep you on the road so that you won't find yourself going into the ditch. And some of these ditches could be deep. They could be several feet deep, or could probably take you into a body of water somewhere down there on the side of the road. So when I think about boundaries, the first thing that comes to mind is something that keeps me on the road even when I fail, or when I miss the mark, or when I get distracted. So I want you to have this picture in mind as we start to delve into this today. So what are boundaries? Boundaries is that line or limit which partners set to protect their marriage and prevent themselves from exploitation or manipulation. Boundaries enable you to draw a line for each of you so that no one can cross. And the purpose of that is to protect you and your marriage. So I'd like to take the first part again. Boundaries is that line or limit which partners set to protect themselves and also their marriage. So the goal of this is self-protection. Boundaries is not to say that you can't do this or you can't touch that, but it's a way of keeping us on the road. It's a way of keeping us safe and protecting not just ourselves, but also protecting our marriage, that institution in which we are. So boundaries is also setting the expectation for what you want or what you want to see in the marriage. It's not building walls or a way of cutting people off or preventing your wife from having her way or your husband from doing what he wants to do. That's not what this is about. But it is a way of you setting that expectation, making it clear that these are my standards as we get into this relationship, or these are the things I don't want to see, or these are the things that I would like to see. You know, we have to be clear about what we really want, and we have to also let our spouse and all the people around us know, you know, what we have set as our boundary, and also how that is going to help us to establish a great relationship with the people around us. So boundaries are very, very important. If we don't have boundaries, we leave things up to whatever happens, so we can make any choices in life and expect that we get the best results. So just imagine being on the highway with no guardrails. You know, we set ourselves up for trouble, and we do not want that. So I have various resources that I'm using today. So the first one is from Proverbs 25:16. It says, "Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest he have his fill of you and hate you." This one can get anyone clear. So the point I'm making here with the scripture is that you have to set boundaries for yourself and say, you know what, based on the scripture, Proverbs 25:16, that I've been to my friend's house the past 2 weeks. You know, I think it's time for me to set a boundary here and say, you know what, I've had enough. Let me take a little bit of a break. You know, that was what the Bible was admonishing us in the scripture, that, you know, you have to be careful how many times you set foot in your neighbor's house, because at some point your neighbor will say, you know what, it's enough. So setting those boundaries for yourself. If your neighbor says it's enough, he's setting a boundary. So you also have to set a boundary for yourself as to what you know you need to do or what you cannot do. When you set a boundary for yourself, you're saying, here is the line between what is okay for me and what is not. And the same applies also to our relationship. When we set boundaries, we're saying, this is what I agree with, or this is what works for me. And this has nothing to do with the general principles of your marriage. This is something personal. The personal things that work for you, or things that does not work for you. What are some of the areas that as individuals we can set personal boundaries? Some of them are self-respect. If we have a healthy level of respect for ourselves, it's setting a boundary, saying that there are certain things I won't do. You know, as a married man, I'm not going to go stay out at a club till 1 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. You know, self-respect, you're setting a boundary for yourself. You know, self-love. Self-love is your commitment to take care of yourself and have a healthy love for yourself, where you do things that protect you, things that are healthy, things that keep you healthy and living well. You don't do anything to harm yourself. You know, taking care of yourself. It includes personal grooming. It includes eating well. You know, it includes all the things that we do. Visiting your doctor to make sure your yearly checkups. All those things are important. You know, it helps you to set that right expectation for yourself, and it's also a boundary in itself, because you are putting in checks, guardrails to make sure you're healthy, you're well, and you're being taken care of as an individual. The last one on this list is emotional intelligence, and that's something we spoke extensively about just about 3 weeks ago. If you go to our website, Enjoy Life with Your Spouse, .org or .com, any one of those will take you there, and look through our archives. You're going to find this show we had a couple of weeks ago on emotional intelligence. That will really help you to learn a lot about this. So what can we set boundaries for? What are the areas where we can set boundaries that will help protect us in our relationship? We can set boundaries for our personal space. That includes your home. That includes anything that pertains to you and the space in which you live in. You can also set boundaries around sexuality, your intimacy with you and your wife. Setting boundaries there means that there are certain things that are just between the two of you. You don't go out to talk about it. You don't share it with your friends. Setting boundaries there means there are certain things that they are no. You cannot bring into your marriage bed, and there's so much we can talk about. And one of them is pornography, that, over and over, science and research shows that that's one boundary that if married couples cross, it diminishes their sexual satisfaction, it brings unhappiness, and it has the potential to destroy your relationship. That is a boundary. Emotional thoughts, time and energy, all these are areas. So how do you manage your time? Do you have any boundaries that keep your time? For example, if you have a family, do you spend time doing things for other people and neglecting your own family? That's a boundary you could set right there. If you're married, are you spending time doing things for other families or other spouses and neglecting your own wife? That is very, very important. And then our faith is another way. Our ethics and our culture, they are all different ways that we can set boundaries. Boundaries saying that, for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. For me and my house, we'll go to church every Sunday. We will seek the face of God. These are all areas that we can set boundaries for ourselves and also for our relationships that can really help us to grow. Now, as we get into the details of this, now we're going to look at boundaries to improve our relationships. So you're married, you've been married for a few months or several years. What boundaries do you have that help protect your relationship? Boundaries protect your relationship from becoming unsafe. And I think I've already established that. In that way, they actually brings us closer to each other than further apart, and therefore necessary in every relationship. Setting boundaries is important, and as we go through this, we're going to get into the details of looking at how do you set boundaries. I hope that as you think about all of this, it will give you some content and some material to really discuss with your spouse as we go into this weekend. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Akwesi Opong. This is Sunlight Radio Online, and today we are talking about boundaries in marriage. We'll be right back. Hello again, and thanks so much for joining us. This is Akwesi Opong with Sunlight Radio Online, and we are so glad that you've made time in your day to be with us. We are very excited about our topic for today. It is setting boundaries, healthy boundaries for your marriage. And we've already talked about setting boundaries for yourself as an individual. And as we go on, we're going to look at how we go about the process of setting boundaries. And one thing I want to put out there is that boundaries can be flexible. And I already established earlier that the goal of boundaries isn't to cut people off or to restrict your wife from doing certain things or to put you in a box and chain you up so you can have your freedom. No. Boundaries are designed to keep you safe and also to keep your relationship safe. Just like the guardrails on the highway. The purpose of it is to keep you safe. Just think of it, you're on a bridge. The bridge always has a guardrail that prevents you in case something happens, you hit the guardrail and then stay on the road so that you don't go off the road into a ditch or into the water. So the idea of boundaries is to keep you safe. So boundaries are not meant to put any pressure on you or create rules to limit your freedom. That's not what this is about. So boundaries allow us to conserve our emotional energy. Because think of it, if you don't have boundaries or any form of guardrails, your self-esteem and identity can be impacted, and you build resentment towards others because of your inability to advocate for yourself. And I'm saying this because if you don't have guardrails or boundaries, think of all the emotional battles you'll be fighting, the things you shouldn't do that you should do. Think of the example I gave earlier. You don't have any boundaries as a husband. You can go out anytime and you get into trouble. Think of the emotional toll on the rest of your family, your wife, yourself. It could even have a toll on your job. Things that we put in place to say we can do this, we can go here. It protects us and it saves us from so much emotional energy. Boundaries also gives us space to grow and be vulnerable. Vulnerability is always good because you're being vulnerable in the sense of saying that, I wish I could do this, but for the sake of my marriage, I won't do it. I'm setting a boundary to say I won't do this because it's going to protect my marriage. That's vulnerability. That is, you cutting things off by saying that I'm going to deny myself of this just so that my marriage is safe. And it also gives you that space you need to develop your marriage, because that time you could be spending doing things and going places you shouldn't be, that time could be invested in your relationship, which is very, very important. So we all deal with various complex issues and feelings in life, but setting boundaries and then not keeping them when the time is right will always bring us to the point of showing our vulnerability. In the beginning, when you set these boundaries, it could happen that you could break them, but we always have to be aware of where those boundaries are so that when we break them, we can always come back and recover and stay on track. So what are some physical boundaries that we can look into as we go through this process of understanding what boundaries in marriage is and how that can help us? Physical boundaries for your marriage. Communication is one thing. The way you communicate, knowing what you can say and what you cannot say in your marriage. Setting a boundary when it comes to communication is knowing that you cannot bring up hurtful things about your spouse, even in the midst of a conflict when it's heated and you really want to punch back so hard. A boundary is knowing that you cannot bring up hurtful things about your spouse. That is a boundary. Another very important one is no physical abuse. Setting the boundary that if you're in a relationship in this conflict, you will not, and I say it again, you will not, under no circumstance, lift up your hand to hit or inflict any form of pain on your spouse, especially men hitting women. It is uncalled for. It is below any man's level, and on this show, on our platform, we strongly condemn it as something that should not even be thought of as an option of dealing with any issue in humanity, let alone come to your relationship. So that is a strong boundary that has to be buried so deep into the ground, nothing is taking that off. No form of physical abuse, no form of inflicting pain on your spouse in order to get your way or to establish control. That always tells me that person who inflicts pain in order to get his way has a controlling issue. They want to be heard, and they don't have the skill to use words, so they use pain to get their message across. It is a line that no man or woman should cross. It is a big no. So as we move along, work and life boundaries, very important. You know, so many people have jobs and that take them out of the house, and some in this season of COVID and the lockdown, their jobs keep them at home too. But what's important is knowing when your work stops and when your life as a husband or father begins. You know, it's important that we set those boundaries very clearly. You know, I find myself sometimes, you know, between work and, you know, spending time with family, that there are certain times that I draw that line and say, when the phone rings, you know, I'm not going to take it. It's outside my work hours, and I have to focus on certain things that are important to me. And I'm saying this again with care, because this is not to slack in your job or to neglect your work. That's not the point here. But the time that is allotted to work, make sure you're diligent. Make sure you work very hard. Make sure you put in your best when it's time to do your work. There are times where you have to work more, and it is fine. I said earlier that boundaries are not rigid, except the one on physical abuse. That one is rigid. You can move that. But when it comes to things about work and time, you can always tell your family, you know, today I'm going to work 2 more hours because there's some deadlines I have to reach. You have communicated that to your spouse and your children, so it's clear to them why you are not home or why you're still working. It's always important for us to communicate these things and make it clear, you know, so when the time comes and the need comes for you to put in more work, it's actually a commendable thing to do. But what I'm talking about here is when work never ends, and it's taking time from your wife, it's taking time from your family, and your family begins to suffer as a result of that. Let's be aware that we have to draw the line between work and life balance. And when the need comes for you to work some more, communicate that to your family and let them know. So moving right along, the boundaries with your friends. This is a big one. You know, we are individuals before we got married, and we have friends. And sometimes as couple, you make new friends once you get into your relationships. And it's important that we have clear boundaries as to which friends we have, you know, what we do with our friends, you know, what we tell our friends, what we don't tell our friends, and you know, how much exposure into our personal life as couples we give to our friends. You know, your friends can just show up if your wife wants to take a nap in the afternoon. You have to talk to your wife about it and say, my friends want to visit, and when is a good time for you, or what can we work out to make this happen, so that your wife doesn't feel that she's being violated by friends and the time and all of that. We have to set good boundaries when it comes to friends. Now, another thing about friends too is that we have to be careful the kind of friends we have. That's also another boundary. That as a married man, I'm not saying go and tell all your single friends that you're not friends anymore, but be aware that if you are married and you have single friends, your stage of life or season in life is different. So there are certain things they will expect to do that as a married man you wouldn't be able to go. And again, I go back to the example I made earlier, like staying up into the early hours of the morning and not being home. You know, that tends to create other problems as well. So the kind of friends, you know, having friends that share the same value as you, the same value systems, the same faith as you, and being in the same season of life is always a helpful thing, because you gain strength from them. They're able to equip you, they're able to encourage you, and you're able to do life together. So set boundaries around your friends. Another area we need to set some strong boundaries is also about extended families, parents-in-law, you know, extended family systems, and it's a big one that has brought a lot of couples a lot of hate, pain, and heartache. We have to set boundaries that work for it. So that's another area that as a husband and wife can sit down and set those rules and say, you know what, when it comes to our extended family, how can we help them? First of all, can we even help them financially if the need comes? If you agree, how much, how often, if family wants to visit, how often, how long? We have to set those expectations and make sure that we set those boundaries before the day comes. I often say you do not look for the jack in your car when you get a flat on the highway. You have to know where it is, and you have to make sure it's in your car. You don't look for your cell phone charger when you're on the road. You make sure you have it and you know where it is before you leave the house. So this is one discussion that you have to have before the call comes that family wants to visit. Make decisions that will support your relationships, make decisions that will put life into your relationships, and make sure that extended families, as great as they are, will not have a toll on your relationship. This is a very, very important and noteworthy as well. The use of your time. How do you use your time? We already talked about balancing work life, and how do you use your time when you're home? Do you spend your time watching football games as a husband, or as a wife? Do you spend time on the phone talking endlessly with your friends and neglecting your husband? We have to set boundaries when it comes to our time. How much time do you invest in your marriage? How much time do you invest in yourself as an individual? You create the me time, as my wife and I call it. You have to have me time, time for yourself. You have to invest time into developing yourself as well. Making sure you set these boundaries are important. Sometimes we all get into that loop where you sit down and we watch so much TV. We're now beginning to tell that, what, I think I've had too much. I have to get up and do something productive, clean the house, or do some projects around the house, or spend time with your children, or even go for a walk to make sure that, it keeps you healthy. So let's set boundaries on things that we do so that it benefits us, it helps us, and it keeps putting us on the path to being successful in our relationships and all the things we do. Again, my name is Akwesi Opong. This is Sunlight Radio Online, and we will be with you shortly.
Anywhere you go, give it up.